Welcome to the Courage to Be podcast with Tanya Vasallo. Before we get into this episode, I want to share with you that I'm on a mission to close the gender gap in the podcasting world so that more and more women's voices are heard. If you feel that this is something you value too, then please rate, review, and share the podcast. And in exchange, and as my way to say thank you to you, I want to give you free access to my signature course called Manifesting Abundance, which typically sells for $997. All you have to do to gain access is leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, take a snapshot of it, and send it to help.thecouragetobe@gmail.com, and we'll get you set up with access to the course. Welcome back to the Courage to Be, where we have powerful conversations to transform your life and your business. And we have Gina Maier Vincent with us today. Welcome, Gina.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm excited to be with you.
I'm looking forward to this conversation just because our energies have been aligned from the first moment that we met. You know, I've gotten to be on your podcast. I'm having you on my podcast now. And I want you to share with our audience, with our listeners, a little bit of your story. What is it that you do and what lights you up? Yeah. Tell us a little bit of yourself, Gina.
So a little bit of my story is I've lived a life of many twists and turns, and of which I learned how to, and many curveballs. I've learned to stand taller and prouder and really take the positives from them. And I think that the one that really pushed me over the edge was when I was advocating for my husband, Mark's life, which you know the story, but to keep it short, my husband was in kidney and liver failure on the heels of bringing our youngest, our daughter, who we adopted in Guatemala, home from Guatemala, and our biological son was in kindergarten. So it was going up against a medical system, going up against antiquated concepts, and the men in white, I like to say, because his team was all male, and so many different things came up. And during that time, I was teaching yoga for fun and pleasure. And it was, for me, mostly about the mindset, and had really, I guess, I would say, built my name around being able to work with the mindset, not just a yoga pose. And I knew then, once he got healthy, he received a kidney and a liver from a woman my age, my blood type, at Mayo Clinic, which was 650 miles away from where we lived in North Carolina at the time. And I just knew immediately what I was doing needed to be bigger, grander, on a much bigger scale, kind of like the work you're doing with a podcast show, one-on-one work instead of group yoga classes. Now I work one-on-one. I like to say I'm your master motivator. I can get a lot of stuff done and people moving in a direction that is not like a 180-degree change for them. It's just small mindset shifts that change people's lives, tools that you can use no matter if it's personal or professional. And I think you can tell I'm very passionate about it. It really lights me up from the inside, because now I advocate for people to live a better life, a magnificent life, one that suits their desires, not what society deems as success.
Wow, we have a lot to continue with this, Gina. And this is something that I've noticed from the moment I met you, you know, if just your positivity, your optimism, you know, like you are this ray of sunshine. And for those of you that are listening to the podcast, and you can't see her visually. So if you're watching on YouTube, great. But if you're just listening, you can't see visually. Gina is just this gorgeous woman, you know, with her big red lipstick and her beautiful jewelry. And I'm seeing her logo behind of Exquisitely Aligned, you know, that it just, you're a brand, you're a walking brand. And I love that about you. But you're just this ray of sunshine that comes out, and how you're seeing everything so positive, and having a husband, you know, that needed a kidney transplant, adopting a daughter, you know, like, let's go back a little bit, because you kind of just glanced over it like, oh yeah, everyone goes through this kind of stuff in their life.
I hope they don't, but yes.
So tell us a little bit about some of these moments of courage that you've had to tap into, because life dealt you some specific cards,
Yeah.
maybe difficult, challenging cards at that time.
Yeah.
Do you want to share about your husband and then about
Yeah.
adopting your daughter, or
Yeah.
tell us
Yeah.
any other ones that
Yeah.
might come?
You know what? I'll do it chronologically. So I'll do adopting our daughter because that was first. And I always, I'm the one who's constantly bringing in stray cats and going to the shelter to pick up a dog and things like that. And I always felt a calling towards adoption, even when I was younger. And Mark and I discussed it before we got married while we were engaged. And then when I wasn't getting pregnant so easily the second time, I thought, this is the time. And we knew Mark's mom had died of a polycystic kidney, and her liver was affected as well. But we didn't know how sick Mark was at the time. And adopting a child is such a great joy, but it's not always easy, right? Neither is having a baby, right? Sometimes it's always a great joy, but sometimes maybe our bodies are not cooperating, or we're just physically need to lay down and be in bed rest. But it was a great time. From what I understand, Guatemala is no longer open for international adoptions. Sonia was in a foster home with another baby who was going to be adopted, plus three of the family's biological children. And the son was similar age as our son. So when she came home to us, she understood Kai. She was ready to play. She was 6.5 months old, but she understood that energy. And through that, it was a long process with many ups and downs, as you can imagine. Like, oh, she's almost legally free. Oh, no, they forgot a paperwork. Oh, no, they have to find her birth mom to bring her back to sign something. So it was, like having a baby without a due date, kind of. And we were fortunate. We had an easier time than other families we knew who were adopting from Guatemala, where it took well over a year. For us, from start to finish, it was 11 months that she was home. And then Mark became sick. I think Sonia was home just for a few months, and he went to the doctor and they're like, oh gosh, like you are quickly heading down the path of kidney failure. What they didn't address was he was also in liver failure. And unfortunately for us, I was a good match for him to be a donor. And I think because I was on Mark's insurance and he had very good health insurance, that maybe, and this is all just me thinking out loud, maybe they just were like, hey, we got two, ching ching, one surgery, remove a kidney, another surgery, big surgery, right? This all adds up financially. And she's healthy, he's healthy. But what they didn't address, unfortunately for my husband, was when they removed both of his kidneys to put him on dialysis for what was to be 6 weeks before taking my kidney and giving it to him, was they deroofed a huge cyst off his liver, the size of like a baseball, and that set him into liver failure. And we had no idea that when they wheeled him in, he had no idea. My husband's a family doctor and he's kind of well versed on this disease because his mom died of it while he was in medical school. So, or residency, sorry. We had no idea they were going to do it. They didn't ask, they didn't tell. And it was just like Band-Aids for months after, before I finally said to my husband, they're going to let you die. Like, if you were the doctor for yourself, what would you do for the patient? And he said, I'd get a second opinion. I was like, okay, there we go. And that's when we got to Mayo Clinic. And it was a beautiful younger surgeon, female, who saved his life. It was incredible, but it was me having to stand up and argue and advocate. I guess I shouldn't say argue, but advocate. And I always thought to myself, thank God, Tanya, that I speak English, and I speak English. I'm not as eloquent as my husband or you, but that I speak English and I can stand up for what I believe in, because I think oftentimes we put the doctors and the medical team on a pedestal. But if we know our person, our husband, our child well enough, we see the differences on a daily basis of how they're feeling and how they're acting and what they're saying. It was crazy. It was something, I think I suffered post-traumatic stress syndrome from living that life for a year. He couldn't urinate for 8.5 months because he had no kidneys. It was nuts.
Thank you for sharing this because it's reminding me of an episode that we did with Melior Sims, and it was all about the courage to advocate for herself with her
Yeah.
dental issues because she was having, I think she had like maybe 7 root canals, and on the
Yeah.
seventh one, she's like, enough. I'm not
Yeah.
doing this. I'm not going through with it. And it's
Yeah.
like what you're saying. I think we sometimes put too much emphasis on the white coats and on
Yes.
the doctor's expertise.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you're sharing the story with your husband being a
One of
doctor
them.
himself.
One of them.
Yes, but what's amazing is that you followed your intuition because
Yeah.
I think sometimes in order to be able to advocate for ourselves, we have to listen inwardly. Like,
Yeah.
what is the right thing and what should be my next best step? And so you were able to do it,
Yeah.
just instinctually, it just happened to be that way. It's not like you sat down and you thought about it.
Right.
But by us sharing these kind of stories, it's a reminder for everyone that's listening. If
Yes.
you ever feel off when you go to the doctor, go listen to Melior's episode
Yeah.
90. But listen to Gina's story here. Her husband was a doctor and she asked. So she first followed her own instinct and her own intuition of like, well, honey, what would you do? Like if you were in this position and you were the doctor. And his response was, get a second opinion. So it's okay to get second, third
Yes.
opinions if you have to. I'm in the process right now with dental. The first doctor said a cavity, do a filling because it's right at the edge of another molar that
Oh,
had a root canal. And something told me, like, he just saw me really fast. I just met this
yeah.
dentist. And so I asked another one in the same practice, and she said, I'm a root canal. And then when I saw the pricing for the root canal, I was like, I don't know, man. Like, are they just trying to make money? Like what you're
Yeah.
saying, like sometimes we also
Yeah.
have to remember that a doctor is running a business, that a dentist is running a business. And
Yeah.
so they have to look for their things too. And so I'm in the process of this, Gina, and now I'm going to get a third and maybe even a fourth opinion because I'm
Yeah.
going to be sending my x-rays to my doctor in Spain.
Yeah.
And so I just thank you for sharing that story and getting the second opinion. So what followed up with this and what would you
Yeah.
say to our audience with this conversation of advocating for
Yeah.
ourselves?
I think, really, and I have to, the backstory is I was exhausted. I wasn't sleeping. I was trying to care for 2 kids, take care of a house. We had 2 cats at the time, and coordinating who could be at the house while I'm at the hospital. It was nuts. So say I'm running on fumes at this point, right? And then I moved him to Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, on our 10th wedding anniversary, and put the kids in their 2 car seats, a booster and a car seat, to drive home, 6 hours to North Carolina where we were living. But you said it beautifully. Like, we have to listen to our, whatever the word is, intuition, gut instinct, inner knowing, inner GPS. Whatever that is for you, I believe we know things, how to heal ourselves. And I don't mean from everything, but how to correct if we're moving down a wrong path. What's the right job? Who to marry, not to marry? I believe we have these inner knowings. It's just making sure we slow down. And if you can even pause to have those quiet moments to really listen in and go deep. And if that means you need to meditate or do breath work or go for a walk or sit quietly in nature, or I like to be warm, sit near a warm window if it's too cold outside, the fireplace, but sip on a cup of hot tea, whatever that is, to really take a moment, because we were in that hamster wheel, running from this appointment, that appointment, and then kids needed to be met at the bus stop, at the preschool, and the dialysis center, and the doctor, and the blood transfusions. It was nuts. But if you can slow down and listen, that's when I think you can find your voice And I help a lot of people, and I'm sure you do the same, Tanya, with crowdsourcing their confidence. I think so often we're taught to look outside. Oh, Google it. Oh, when I was little, we had to go to the library, crack open the Britannica encyclopedia, but now we have a lot of information at our fingertips. Sometimes it doesn't align, right? One person thinks it's this, another person says you do that. But if you can, be your own authority and really stand tall in that. And I will tell you, I wasn't met with open arms. I was told by one doctor in particular that he told Mark and I in the same room, next time, Mark, I will meet with you while your wife waits in the waiting room. And when we're finished, I'll bring her in and you can wait outside. And I looked at my husband and I said to him, do you see now what I'm talking about? And I said, I will not go behind a closed door with this man because it's going to be a he said, she said. And I didn't think he was going to touch me inappropriately, but I knew we were going to be butting heads. He wanted to speak to Mark in medical terms, and he really didn't want to share with me in layperson's terms.
How did Mark react to this?
It was the breaking point. I was so angry that this doctor said it, but I was so grateful that he said it because finally Mark said, okay, we can we can go elsewhere. Now I get it. Because I said to him, would you ever tell a couple that in your practice? He said, no. And I said, exactly. Like and we're talking, this was only 15 years ago, Tanya. This was not, I'm not talking 50 years ago. This was 2009. And I have a feeling this same kind of stuff still happens. And, I think as a woman, sometimes we're overlooked and silenced, and it's not a nice place to be. Especially if you're a fiery person like myself, where you're like, I have something to say, you're going to listen to me. So
we're going to take a quick pause because I have many more things to ask about this, Gina. Hi there, I have something really cool for you. I want to give you free access to my signature course called Manifesting Abundance, which typically sells for $997. You can check out all the details in the show notes. All you have to do to gain access is leave me a review on Apple Podcast, take a snapshot of it, and send it to help.thecouragetobe@gmail.com, and we'll get you set up with access to the course. You can also find other free goodies in the show notes. Go check them out. Okay, you just shared this story. Well, there's a couple questions that are showing up for me. You just shared the story of, just advocating for your husband and then standing up to this doctor and having the conversation with your husband of like, did you just see what happened? Would you have done the same thing?
Right.
And Mark saying no, that he wouldn't. And so it sounds to me from that conversation that you and Mark have a great foundation, great communication, a great you're a great team, of like problem solving.
Most days, yes.
So talk to us about that. How can we,
Yeah.
for those of us that have partners, life partners,
Yeah.
even business partners, maybe you don't have a life partner, but you have a
Right.
business partner, like, how do you set that foundation? Because that was beautifully said, from the moment like of adopting your daughter, that you said that you and Mark sat down and talked about this. You also talked about, it sounds like difficult moments in your life and your relationship, but not in the relationship in itself. Like life is throwing things to you guys as a team, and that you guys are good problem solvers and can talk. Like, how can us as listeners mimic that and model that so that we can create wonderful foundations?
Well, I love the compliment first, and it's not easy. I will tell you, opposites attract, and I married mine. We couldn't be we fall in love with the same house when we're going to buy a house. We have very much, we see child rearing very much the same. We have very much the same values, but the way we live our lives are very different. I'm the extrovert, the one with a TV podcast show, right? And he's the introvert. So I am definitely the communicator, and he is very well spoken. I mean, that was one of the things that I found attractive when we started dating. But he is very much more quiet and in his head with his thoughts. But, these things like this forced him to be able to start expressing. And I have to say also, for those 8.5 months where he couldn't urinate, when you're living on dialysis solely and you have no kidneys because they were out of the body now, you become toxic on the brain. So that uric acid kind of builds up on the brain because you're only doing dialysis 3 or 4 days a week. Finally, I got it to where he was doing at home 6 days a week, but it's exhausting on the body. So he was, like, I want to say, a fraction of a man at this point. He was skin and bones, trying to work. I mean, it was like a joke. For him, he wanted to work because it was normal. It was part of the routine. It made him feel alive. Meanwhile, I was like, your body needs rest. But it wasn't that our conversations were beautiful and we were smiling and holding hands. A lot of times it was heated, you know? It was me saying, Mark, wake up. Like, we have 2 young kids. You have to work with me. I don't mind advocating for you, but I need you to work with me. Like, we need to be on the same page and we need to communicate about this because for him, I think, I wasn't there for his childhood, but I think a lot was swept under the rug, kind of to say, like, oh, everything is perfect. Let's just sweep it under the rug. We won't see it. Therefore, we won't think about it. We won't feel it. For me, it's like, I still know it's under there, and it's taking up space. It's dirty. It's clutter. Like, I need it out. Like, let's just, I'm a touch it once person. I don't want to put it under the rug. I want to get it out of the house and be like, okay, next, now we can enjoy ourselves and have a party. So it's not that it was easy, but I think, again, like, I'm a firm believer in part of Exquisitely Aligned is, honoring your truths. My truth was, I need to talk about this. I need to be a partner with you. And then my strong desire was in 2009 that my husband would be alive to see our son graduate USC here in California and our daughter to start U of A in Tucson, and for us to walk on the beach here in California, even though the kids were in preschool and elementary school and we were living in Charlotte. But all of that's come true this past spring and fall, and he'll celebrate 15 years on November 19th. So, I think if you can really honor who you are, I knew my husband would get mad at me, Tanya, when I was, like, in his opinion, coming after him, right? By, like, bringing it up, bringing it up. But at the same time, I knew in my hearts that if I didn't, he might not be here, And I think we're constantly walking a balance, whether it be with a business partner, a life partner, or even with our children, right? Or parents, like, you don't want to offend somebody, but at the same time, you're like, we need to address the elephant in the room. And I hope that answers your question. It's not easy, but stick to it and just have the courage, like, right? Have the courage to be. I had to be who I am, which is, a crazy New York Italian advocate with a thick-headed German, mentality. Like, this is how it's going to be, whether we're at this hospital or we're going elsewhere. And I wanted to bring up one point now that I say that. Earlier, you talked about the dental going for another opinion. The beauty of what I didn't know back then is that insurance will cover that for you to get other opinions. Like, it doesn't mean you have to pay out of pocket because you're going to see a second or a third. So I just wanted to mention that in case someone listening didn't know, like I didn't know. I was
I
like,
didn't know.
yeah,
Thank you for sharing that
yeah,
because I'm sure many people listening had no idea.
yeah.
So thank you for that share. But you just mentioned, being New York Italian with your German, you're more fiery, and just like wanting to advocate and fight, what would you say to other women? Because I don't like that story you said about the doctor that he said, we'd have your wife step out of the room. You know, the doctors did the same thing to my mother-in-law when she had my husband's twins and when they were the last of four other kids, you know, the last of
Oh,
six.
wow.
And so,
Wow.
yeah, but that was in 72. And as soon as she delivered the twins, delivered my husband and my brother-in-law, the doctors went in and asked my father-in-law, should we tie up her tubes so that you guys don't have any more kids? And this is, we're talking 50 years ago, and
Yeah.
he never asked her. They asked the husband. And the fact that this just happened to you in 2009,
Yeah.
like to me, it just like infuriates me too. And I'm like, oh my God,
Yeah.
we need to do something about this. But what about the women that are maybe more introverted? Maybe they grew up with like,
Yeah.
no, we don't say anything about it and then let's shove it underneath the rug, like you were saying with your husband, you know, like, because not all of us
Right.
have it in us. What would you say to someone that's listening that of why we have to advocate and how we could do it and pay attention to that?
Yeah. I love that question because I understand it very well. I mean, I think some of us are born feisty and fiery. I know I was, but finding my voice wasn't until I was a little bit older. I think I saw my mother with her voice and always was like, oh, she's embarrassing, And then later in life, I realized I needed that voice. And so to start with, how do you do it? For me, it's always about playing and not, I think, especially when we're type A and a high achiever and goal driven, we want to get it right the first time. And for me, I always ask my clients, please don't feel like you have to get it right. Just try a little bit. Try one sentence one day, then try two sentences the next day, and just play like a child, like you're learning to ride a new bicycle or you're, I don't know, learning how to ice skate, something maybe you haven't done in a while or haven't ever done. And I think that when we can realize that we don't have to be perfect at it, but just try it, then we can build up the strength and the muscles that we need in our voice to do that. The other part, I think, is if we can go into it with a little bit thicker skin, knowing that it's okay to advocate and it's okay to speak up and it's okay. I think sometimes people appreciate it more, right? Those doctors didn't. But in a marriage, I think someone would rather know, or even a business relationship or dating relationship, rather know how you feel than I just heard a story of a poor woman who, after 30 years of what she thought was a beautiful marriage, the husband woke up and said, I'm not happy, I'm leaving today. Like, you hear that story and you're thinking, how could that happen? But maybe he didn't speak up. And I think it happens for men and women, right? My husband's the quieter one. But if we can understand that with the right person, they do want to hear from you. And if it's the wrong person, like it was at this hospital, it was time for us to get that second opinion and go elsewhere.
Yes, it sounds like the bottom line of what the thread of what I'm hearing in all of
Yeah.
this, Gina, is communication. You know,
Oh,
it's like
totally.
if you can communicate well with your husband, if you can let them know how you feel to your partner, if you can communicate to the doctor, you know, like
Yeah.
this is just not right and it's not appropriate. And you know what would have made it even better to take it to the next level? And I don't know if this is something that you did is to explain to the doctor why you were leaving. You know, like not only just leaving, because
Yeah.
sometimes that's how I might operate, you know, like
Mhm.
because I might not have the courage in that moment, or I don't have to educate, you know, the
Yeah.
person. Like that's the story I'm telling myself. But I think sometimes that might help that other person too, of
Oh,
just
yes.
knowing, you
Yeah.
know, of just like, you know what? We didn't like how you treated me
Oh, they
and you
knew.
did.
Yeah.
Oh, they knew. So it's
Well,
good for you for
yeah,
sharing
no,
that.
that same doctor told me I reminded him of his wife, and I smiled, because I thought, oh, you must love your wife. And then later, like a few sentences later, he told me she's an attorney. And what was the other comment he made? my staff is afraid of you. And I
Wow.
thought, your staff is afraid of me because they know I'm catching all of the doctor's mistakes. Like there was another doctor on his team that they fired from his team. He still had his job, but he was taken off Mark's thing because he was not tracking his. It's a long story, but Mark needed 33 pints of blood over what, 4 months, the whatever it was, because he was in liver failure and the blood was leaving through the liver, et cetera, et cetera. And, that one doctor wasn't watching the numbers. And I kept calling in, like, my husband's pale. My husband can't change his shirt without like sitting down. My husband's out of breath. And so they removed him. And I was like, yeah, I don't think your staff is afraid of me. They're just knowing that so many things have shit hit the fan maybe or fell through the cracks and things like that. One thing I do want to back up to say, Tanya, if you don't mind, is, and I'll make it fast, is that I think when we have trouble finding our voice and we're playing, like some of the things I ask people to do simply by themselves is like journal, write it down what you think you want to say. I'm an advocate of my phone, you know, and I'm not going to say her name, but hey, as Siri, voice to text. And then I start or opening the voice recorder to just practice what you want to say. Like, Dr. So-and-so, I don't agree with blah, 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 blah. And I always carried a notepad with me when I went in and out of the doctor's appointments. I brought in, these are the things I'm noticing. And they'd say, well, we'll run blood work. And I was like, you don't need to run blood work. I know his bilirubin is too high. His eyes are yellow, and sure, they'd run the blood work and they'd come back. You have high levels of bilirubin. I'm like, like it's sometimes you're like, if you just open your eyes, we don't always need the blood work and the proof. You can just, and I'm not even a doctor, but, as the advocate, you very much know. So, I mean, journal, voice record, write things down, just so you can practice and find that voice.
Yeah, let's go deeper into this, Gina. Like, what are some of your practices that you recommend? Like you were
Mhm.
talking before about slowing down, in
Oh,
these moments of speed.
yeah,
And what did you call it?
yeah.
Crowdsourcing our
Trusting
information,
your confidence.
your
Yeah,
confidence. That's what you
yeah,
were saying. Because I feel like we live in a culture and in a time period where there is just way too much information. We're
yeah,
not carving out time to be in silence and just
yeah,
be so that we can listen.
yeah.
Because you can't advocate for yourself unless you're
Right,
getting those intuitive hits.
right.
So let's go deeper into that part,
Hmm.
of like, how do you connect to intuition? Because you
Yeah.
seem like you're very connected. I have another story that maybe you want to share on the podcast because we've shared
Yeah.
before when I was on Gina's podcast, just to give you guys a little bit of reference. We were talking about perimenopause. I was telling her
Mm.
about how I was feeling with all these things, and you had shared, and you can go more in depth with it if you want to, about HRT and that you
Mhm.
started with estrogen. But again, that was another moment that you advocated for yourself because
Yeah.
intuitively you felt that that was not the right hormone. And I
Yeah.
feel like that exact same thing was happening to me because when I went to my
Mhm.
primary, she
Yes.
wanted to diagnose, she wanted to give me either estrogen or a mild antidepressant. And
Oh,
I'm not going to go
wow.
into my whole
Yeah.
story with it, but I did advocate. I did get a second opinion. I went to a functional doctor, regenerative medicine, and I will be doing a menopause series on here. So I don't want to deviate too much with that because to me, you sound like you are very connected with your intuition, with these
Yes.
stories that you're saying about your
Yeah.
husband, like even knowing that you wanted to adopt a child and you wanted to adopt your daughter
Mhm.
before things happen. How can us as listeners get more in touch with our intuition?
Yeah.
Is it through journaling? Do you meditate? Like, what kind of resources can you give us some tips
Yeah.
and hacks for it?
Yeah. So this lights me up from inside. Like I'm like, oh, this is like candy to a child. I think several things. I believe we're born intuitive. Whatever the word is, again, gut instinct, inner knowing. I know some people feel they don't connect with the word intuitive. So whatever the word is for you, I believe we all have it. I think women maybe are more likely to be in touch with it than men. But if you watch a young child, boy or girl, they might come to you and say, I don't like such and such an adult. And you're like, oh, that's not, I think sometimes we are silenced at a young age of, no, that's not right. I know there were times where I was silenced, or like, I don't even know the right words, not told that I was wrong, but like, oh, it's fine, keep going. And you're like, it's a shame that we don't take the time and say, oh, tell me more. Why is it you feel that Mr. Smith or Miss Smith isn't a nice man, and open up that door to hear the child, because they might be seeing things or sensing things that are truths that you don't know, right? And I don't mean they're like pedophiles. I'm just saying the child might know that man is angry. I know my daughter would be like, I know you're mad, mom. And you're like, I'm not mad, and then you're like, well, I was a little mad when, right? It happens to us, especially kids. And I think if we can, first thing I usually advocate for is leaving gaps in your schedule. I think so many of us have been, and when Mark was sick, I definitely was scheduled to death between doctor's appointments and dialysis center and preschool and kindergarten. I had, and then I had my own doctor's appointments and trying to get food on the table, etc. But if you can start leaving gaps in between, I ask people to do 15 minutes. I really love for them to do 30. So if I think I'm on your show for, let's say, an hour and a half, I try to leave then 30 minutes between whatever is next. Why? So that I can go outside. It's a beautiful sunny morning, and I'll make another cup of tea. I like 2 cups of tea in the morning, and I'll sip it outside. I'll say some prayers, I'll meditate. And even if that's for 5 minutes, Tanya, for me, that's just a way of like recharging my battery the same way we plug in our computer and plug in our phone. And I think when we give ourselves these little breathing moments of 5, 15, or even 30 minutes, we're able to tap in and say, oh, that was so much fun. I love being with Tanya. Every time we're together, we connect on so many different things, And in that time, I know that when I'm out there, I'm going to be like, she needs to come back on at my show because let's talk about, right? That's when I get my insights like, oh, she said something that I think my listeners would love to hear. We should film again. It happens to me yesterday. I went on a walk. I had earbuds in and listening to some music so that I keep my pace fast, as I'm trekking up some of the hills in my neighborhood and out of breath. Otherwise, I'll slow down and cheat. But, and in that moment, I was like, oh, yeah, under living. Let me give a voice to what that means for my TEDx talk that I'm working on. And it was like all these, ways of describing that. So I think when I'm an advocate for journaling, but I'll be honest with you, I don't really journal. For me, it's meditating. For me, it's writing. Like, I'm a visual person. So I told you, I dictate into my phone to my notes, or I keep scratch pieces of paper all over my desk, at my nightstand, in the kitchen. And I think if you can start just slowing down and even going outside, that's where I like to send everybody. I think nature is great fuel for inspiration by just the energy level, the beauty, the warmth of the sun. For others, the shade, you know what I mean? The cool breeze. Yeah. So any of those things, I think you just have to figure out which one is yours. I have plenty of clients, one who color codes her journal. Like if she's talking about her professional stuff, it's one color. If she's talking about her kids, it's another. I mean, she's really got it. So when she looks back, she's like, oh yeah, I wanted to tell you about this, Gina. And she could find it within seconds. Purple means something else,
That's fabulous because I
Yes.
am a big journaler. And that's why I
Yeah.
love sharing these stories because not everything fits for everyone. Like
Mhm.
I say, try the different tools that
Yeah.
all the different experts have and see what works for you, And so
Yes.
for you, it might be more meditation. For another person, it might be a walking meditation. For me,
Yeah.
it's more journaling. But with my journaling, I picked that up decades ago from the artist way from Julia Cameron, where
Mm,
she talked about doing morning pages and just write uncensored for 30 minutes as soon as you wake up, because that's when the
yes.
brain's fresh. But what happens with that is you start peeling the onion. And so a lot of the part that's in the journal, it might be like, oh, I'm tired today. Like I'm just like venting in the journal
Yeah.
and I need to, iron the curtains or go grocery shopping. So, and I'm filling up a page of like crap that I don't want to go back and read that. But what happens is 2 or 3 pages in, you
Yeah.
start peeling that onion and you're
Yeah.
like, oh my God, here's an idea for my upcoming event. Oh,
Right.
here's this person I have to contact because I just
Yes.
had an idea with Gina. I interviewed
Yeah.
her today, or I have to do this other thing. So what I've done, but I only started this recently. Like if I were to go back to journals like a decade ago, I wouldn't be able to find this stuff.
Right.
I put like an asterisk and then I have a table of contents at the
Oh,
front. You should
beautiful.
share that with your client,
Yes,
but
I am. Yeah.
I'm going to take from your client, I'm going to borrow
Yes.
from her the color
I love
coding
that.
because I like that, like if it's for business ideas, I'll
Yeah.
color code it one way. So thanks
Yeah.
for sharing that, like
Oh,
I
and
think
thank you. I wrote
this is
it
where we
down.
all grow together, right? We're going
Right.
to take another quick pause and we'll be right back. Hi there, I have something really cool for you. I want to give you free access to my signature course called Manifesting Abundance, which typically sells for $997. You can check out all the details in the show notes. All you have to do to gain access is leave me a review on Apple Podcast, take a snapshot of it, and send it to help.thecouragetobe@gmail.com, and we'll get you set up with access to the course. You can also find other free goodies in the show notes. Go check them out. Okay, before we wrap up, I have to ask you about this crowdsourcing your
Sing your
confidence.
confidence.
Tell me more about this. I love that. I want to see how I can use it.
Yeah, so for me, I think that we live in a world that's constantly begging us to conform. And I think our children are it's even, what's the word, exemplified with them with social media, right? We grew up when there was a monthly magazine. You should look like this, Tanya. Your hair should be this color and this length, and your clothes should look like this, and your jewelry like that. And now, you were saying earlier, like we're bombarded with information all day long. People get news alerts, and there's constant. We're fed this information all the time. And I think if we are looking to social media or to these other people for what should I do? I think it's one thing to go ask somebody for an opinion. I don't know. I'm buying a house. I am torn between, can you tell me about this school district if you have a child in school or something like that? But it's another thing when you're constantly referring to other people's advice. And so for me, crowdsourcing your confidence, a visual would be if you had an empty glass or let's say a glass of water. And then I asked you for your opinion and you're red, and I put a drop of red food dye. Then I asked your husband his opinion of the same thing, and he's blue. And then your daughter is purple. And then, I asked my husband, he's, I don't know, a totally different color. All of a sudden, that water becomes muddy, and you've lost yourself in your confidence and your intuition and your inner knowing. And I think that's where sometimes I've had clients where for years they were everything to everybody, people pleasing, maybe spouse, kids, and then the kids grow up and they leave home, right? Which we're happy about. But then mom is sad and depleted and tells me I have no purpose. And I'm thinking, what do you mean you have no purpose? Like, this is exciting. This is a great time in your life. But when I ask her, what do you love? What are you eager to do? She says, I don't even know. I don't know what I like. I don't, it's like all of a sudden she's lost her knowing of who she is. And so I think it happens a lot. Again, I think that I use the example of a mother or wife, but I know it happens to men too. I've had some older men who were late in their career. I want to say they were working towards retirement. They were semi-retired, and then they're like, I don't even know what I like because I've worked so hard for so long. Again, I'm motioning that hamster wheel, but I've worked so hard so long. I don't even know if I want to stay married. I don't know if my wife loves me. And I'm like, wow, right? Because we've been so externally focused instead of internally. And I think if we can come back, like you were talking about intuition, if we can come back to quieting ourselves, doing the journaling, meditating, or just sitting still and remember who we are in a world that's constantly begging us to fit in or be like or look like. I think also success. What is the definition of success for you? It may not be the definition for me. So why would we let society influence us? Like, is it a house with a white picket fence? I don't really want to paint the white picket fence. I don't know about you. Like that's not who I do like having a roof over my head, but I don't need my house to look like everyone else's.
This is fabulous. And you said it so beautifully. What can we teach? And especially
Yeah.
for you that you have a daughter that's already gone off to college, so is your son. How do we teach our kids crowdsourcing our confidence?
So I usually say, as unique as your fingerprint, own it, especially when so and so's mother is letting her do whatever. And I'm saying no, like, well, that's lovely. That's good for her. But yeah, I have a different rule and you're not going to whatever the deal was. But I think, always ask them, what do you love? What excites you? I like to ask kids when I meet them. I taught paddleboard yoga for a bunch of kids over few summers when I had a paddleboard business years ago on the East Coast. And I'd ask, if you weren't at school and you had no chores, what would you be doing? Because that's when you really get to know what are they really like? What would you fill your time with? And I think I spoke about creating space, but give the kids space. I've seen kids that were like raised in daycare where every 30 minutes there was a new activity to keep them from like picking on each other or, keep them excited. But why not give them space in between instead of being in 5 sports? I'm joking. But like, instead of being picked up from school, changing in the car to go play soccer and then go to dance and then go to the siblings, I don't know, hockey game, say we're going to cut back a little bit and we're going to have dinner together. And over dinner, ask them, what are they passionate about? What do you want to do more of? I mean, I think sometimes it's those simple questions that we don't ask because we either assume or we're too busy.
Oh, you said it so beautifully. Thank you for that, Gina. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so everywhere you can just Google Gina Maier Vincent or come to exquisitelyaligned.com. And today I'm going to just mention you can go to /book or just go to exquisitelyaligned.com. But I am on social media. I write for a few magazines. So when you Google my name or come to my website, you'll see everything there. And the podcast is the same name, Exquisitely Aligned.
What's the name of the book?
It's
It is.
exquisitely aligned. It's
Okay.
a pocket guide. We were trying to change it up, and my publisher came back to me and said, as much as I wanted a different name, she said, Gina, everything you do is exquisitely aligned. And you were alluding to that earlier. And so it's a pocket guide to your magnificent future because I really believe it is for us to advocate for that future. And it's possible. I never ask people to change. It's just shifting the way you're seeing something or experiencing or being.
That is fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing that, Gina. My last question that I love
Yeah.
asking my guests
Yeah.
before we part. What can our listeners do to live a life with more courage?
Oh, for me, I think own who you are. Really just have a knowing or be at peace that you are here for a reason and a purpose. I believe when you align with who you are exquisitely, because I think each and every one is born that way, exquisite, that you become exactly what the world is missing. And I think if you have the courage to be you and own it like your fingerprint with a smile on your face and play. You don't have to get it perfect. Each day we're evolving, transforming, whatever the right word for you is. And that's the beauty of life, right? I mean, otherwise, why would we be here? And the work that you do, I have to commend Tanya for, speaking more than one language so eloquent, having your show, working with everyone you work with on such a big level, big scale. Without your courage, I know there would be a lot of people maybe not getting out of bed today. So I just want to say kudos. Thank you for having me and being able to have this conversation, but kudos to you from the bottom of my heart, because I know who you are and I know how you light up the world and for having the courage to be who you are. So thank you.
Thank you, Gina. I will take it in. I'll receive it. You are fabulous. I love you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. And thank you for being with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hi there. I have something really cool for you. I want to give you free access to my signature course called Manifesting Abundance, which typically sells for $997. You can check out all the details in the show notes, and all you have to do to gain access is leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, take a snapshot of it, and send it to help.thecouragetobee@gmail.com, and we'll get you set up with access to the course.